That's looking all right, isn't it? Not perfect, but it's not bad for the first time that I've painted a guitar by hand. Glenn here, Monster Guitars. Why don't you come and see how I did this? So I've got this guitar back on the bench now. I've drilled the holes for the wraparound bridge. I'm just doing the final sanding before I come to finish the guitar. I've been having thoughts about, I've been going back and forth between different ideas about finishing, but I think I'm going to do what I originally started out doing. I'm just really pausing to say that sometimes you get guitar bodies with a beveled edge, and sometimes you get guitar bodies that are bound, but you don't typically get them together, and I'm kind of finding out why. It's a bit of a pain to scrape the binding when it's at the edge of a body with a bevel like so. I don't know that I'll do that again. But in any event, I'm just sanding up all the little bits. I think I've made a decision about how to finish this guitar. Now, the top, in fact the whole body really, all of this wood made from Australian oak has an open grain, which I'm going to have to fill. I'll at least have to fill it on the top because that's where I'm going to be painting it. And to fill it, I'm going to be using a popular wood filler, a water-based wood filler called Timbermate. And you can get it in all these different sizes. This one is white in color, but you can buy it in all sorts of different colors in an effort to best match the wood that you're working with. But because this is going to be under paint, it doesn't matter if it's white and doesn't quite match the wood. I got white because that makes it easy to dye. I find that a grain filler looks really good under a clear finish if it's been dyed black, but obviously I won't be doing that on the top. And I'm told that it works quite well if you mix it, for the purposes of using it as a grain filler, if you mix it with quite warm water and you make a kind of soupy texture out of it. So let's see how this goes. I'm just using the end of a pencil to do this. Hang on, I'm just going to look for my paintbrush. I'm sure I had it a moment ago. Here it is. Here it is. And you just paint this on. It's going to go on looking something like white chalk paint. Okay, I shall let that dry and then sand it right back. What went on must, of course, now come off. I don't want to remove every trace of it because what would be the point of putting it on? I'm just sanding it back to the point where I can see it in the lines of the grain, but it's not on any of the raised parts. Just going to take the tape off to make my life easier, and then I will put new tape on before I paint it. The tape doesn't cover 100% of the binding, and there will still be a little bit of scraping to do. It just makes life less bad. Okay. Let's take the binding back up and spray some primer on here. Now, this is just a dust mask. I almost did this with no mask. Obviously, if you're doing any kind of serious painting, and certainly for any amount of time, you want to wear proper protection. But this will not take very long at all. And this stuff is not, I mean, obviously it's not good for you, but it's not particularly toxic compared to some of the stuff I might use. This is going to be as quick as anything. I can see it's slightly lumpy and bumpy, only very slightly, like objects that look like grain of sand, maybe little bubbles and stuff. It's slowly clearing up, and then I will sand this very finely and just give it another dusting with primer, and then that'll be done. What I've done is put down a couple of coats. The second one was quite heavy of primer, and it's completely dry today. That was yesterday. And I've scrubbed it with this synthetic steel wool. I suppose you could use regular steel wool as long as you clean up all the filings afterwards, just to get rid of any little bumps and make it all nice and smooth. Okay, the paint. I don't have a compressor. I do plan on getting a compressor. I've got one small detailing spray gun. I need to get a bigger, slightly better gun for when I do get my compressor set up one day. In the meantime, I'm going to brush this paint job. I'm using gold paint. It's going to have what looks like a gold top. And this is just some decent quality art store acrylic high viscosity paint. That's what I'm going to use. And yeah, I do think that's going to be a little bit thicker than I need. I've got some water here, but I'm not going to put very much in at all. Just dribble a little in there. I think that may be enough. You can't really see all this, but take my word for it. So let's just get an idea of how this looks. It's going to need several coats, I imagine. And I will let each one dry. And because I'm using a brush, there will be some brush strokes, some brush lines on the paint surface. I think that's inevitable. Right. It looks bad at this point, which I expected because, well, you can see the brush strokes and you can see the primer between the brush strokes, but given several more coats, 2 or 3, that will improve. It would be a whole lot better if I had a spray gun, a compressor system set up, but I don't yet. So it may be because of the quality of tape, or it may be because of the quality of technique, but this is something that I anticipated when I taped up the binding, and that is that I'm still going to get paint on it, and I have, and that's pretty normal from what I understand. So I'm going to wait for the paint to dry a little bit more. It's not fully dry just yet, the parts that have touched up, and then I'll scrape the binding clean. And then, I was intentionally not all that careful when I was doing things like spraying primer, and I will sand clean and prep the rest of the body. I'll get there, and I may even discover little bits like I can see just there where I'm going to have to come back with maybe a fine brush and tape up the binding again and just touch up the wood. We'll get there. Well, it looks great from a distance. Actually, I don't want to bag on it too much. It looks good in general. Yeah, you can still subtly see the brush strokes. In the end, I resorted to using foam brushes because the brush strokes were even less obvious. But that's not so bad, and those will be a little bit less noticeable when they're under a clear coat, which will be flat. Well, hopefully flat if I do it right. One flaw, you'll see some little patches of paint on the binding. I've just done some touching up. I'll go back and scrape those areas. I haven't overlooked them. One flaw, and it's not a flaw in the paint job, it's just a flaw in the guitar design that I've already mentioned. You'll see the paint on the sides that I need to sand off. That's fine. It's one of the consequences of having the bevel and the binding, which I've commented on before. When you've got the binding level with the surface of the wood, even if it's a carved top, right at the edge, the binding should be level with the surface of the wood, so that when you're scraping the binding, you're also scraping the surface of the wood and they remain level. That's my theory anyway. Whereas here, when you scrape the surface of the binding, of course you're taking a small amount off, and you're also potentially scraping against the wood there, and the consequence of both of those things is that there's now a small drop off at the edge of that bevel, so the bevel doesn't perfectly meet the binding. And I could possibly get a very fine brush and paint that drop off all the way around, but then I'd have to do some more scraping on the binding and possibly just make it worse again. I just won't repeat that design. I won't do it that way in future. Looks okay though, I'll just live with that. But on the whole, check that out. I'll definitely use this paint again, and I'll get a compressor because this paint was not expensive, certainly in terms of the volume of paint, much cheaper than an aerosol can. So I will use that in future. I'm going to wrap things up here just for now. So I've painted the top. That part's done. And I'm wrapping it up now rather than making the video longer and showing you all the way to the end, because I've got several projects going on at the moment, and none of them will be quite ready for finishing and uploading a video for a little while, maybe a week or two. And there hasn't been content for a while, so I'll get this content up. And, other than the small flaws that I've noted, this was a good experience. Well, it is a good experience. This is looking good. It's made me all the more determined to get a compressor sooner rather than later. So, there is one thing I need from you, and that is, if you haven't done it already, subscribe, please. I would really like to boost the visibility of this channel. I think it's a reasonable quality channel. I get some, decent-ish content up there, whereas there are some YouTubers who just sit there and listen to songs and tell you what they thought of them. And they have thousands of subscribers. And this strikes me as an injustice. Like and subscribe, and that will encourage me to produce a lot more of this stuff. And until next time.